OK, thanks everyone for your patience. My name is Nick Pringle. I'm a software engineering lead at Elsevier. We have a stand up there on my right-hand side at the back, and there's some M&Ms if you're feeling a little bit hungry later. I'm going to talk to you about accessibility and React. I think Jamie touched on a very important topics. When using a single-page application, it could damage your SEO, and this is the same for accessibility. The two go hand in hand. So what is web accessibility? Up on the screen, there is a definition, but I think we all know more or less what it means. But I think there are very few people which know all it encompasses. Fortunately, we have some specific standards that refer to accessibility on the web. For example, we have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. At Elsevier, we aim to conform to the WCAG 2.0 level AA. And why do we do this? I think everyone can agree it's the right thing to do, right? But we're actually contractually obligated to conform to these standards. Our customers expect us to do this. So it's the right thing to do, but there's a bottom line. Should you care about accessibility? I think it's always up to your specific use case. I worked at Excite, a music television company. Slava, say hello. Excite made applications specifically for television, and navigation on these apps is done with a remote control. So for us as developers, we didn't have to worry about the WCAG. But WCAG was still applicable because in some countries, our music television videos, the content, that needed to be closed captioned. So it wasn't work for the devs, but it was still a lot of work for somebody else. Fortunately, at Elsevier, we have a lot of organizational support. We have an accessibility team. They're located in one of our tech hubs in the US. We have an accessibility checklist available at a URL, and that was the screen you just saw. We also have access to accessibility training. We have what's called a belting program. So last year, 60 people, most of them devs, achieved their yellow belt in accessibility. This goes all the way to black belt. I don't know what a black belt entails, but it's great to have this kind of support. We also have Accessibility Guild and a Slack channel for accessibility information. But after that, it's up to what happens at the squad level. We need to take responsibility. We need to care about it. We need to champion accessibility. The designers, the devs, and the testers, it's something that we all need to do. So one of the most important things with accessibility is just using Semantic HTML. On your left is an example of where accessibility hasn't been paid attention to. The easiest thing is basically don't use div tags when there are appropriate semantic HTML tags to use. And this is quite obvious. There are some more subtle things. This is mostly how you use headings and how you use sections, because these things come together to create the structure of your website. And screen readers might use, or they might see your website differently because they're relying on this structure. Another thing I see often is instead of relying on the default button styles, people put on-click handlers on a div tag. This means the screen reader doesn't know that the element is interactive. And similarly, an anchor tag without an href is not seen as an anchor tag. You might also want to wrap an icon in a button, but you've got to think, if this is just an icon and there's no text, a screen reader is not going to know what the button does. Likewise, if you have an input and there's no label for the input, it's not clear what the input is actually for. So here's a very specific example from the WCAG. Information, structure, and relationships conveyed through presentation can be programmatically determined or are available in text. So this is something that you get in your guidelines, and you actually have to check if your website does this. The easiest way to check this one is just to remove all the CSS. Removing all the CSS is actually a very humbling experience, because all of a sudden, all the content and your beautiful web page is very, very bland. It sometimes looks like there's almost no content, but this allows you to see the structure, and you can actually solve a lot of issues by just looking at your website in this way. There are some specific React examples. It's important to realize with JSX that all the HTML attributes are fully supported. All the ARIA HTML attributes are fully supported. So you can use ARIA label, ARIA required in your JS6. Another little thing to remember is that you cannot use the ID4 when you use a label. You need to use HTML4 within JS6. Another handy thing is using fragments. If you want to avoid adding unnecessary divs into your HTML and therefore making it less semantic, you can use the React fragments. And there's also a handy shortcut. You don't even have to use the fragment tag. You can just leave it completely empty. Other things to take into consideration with React is it's a single-page application. This means that routing is handled differently. A screen reader or some programmatic thing might not know that you're actually changing a web page. Another thing that goes in line with that is the document title. If you're using React Router, you're not necessarily getting a different document title, and the document title might be important as to what the content is. So finally, I'll just finish off with a few tools that you can use to help take accessibility into consideration. You can use your keyboard, unplug the mouse, and just navigate through your website using purely the keyboard and see how far you get. Make sure you don't get trapped somewhere on your page. Another thing that you should do every now and again is using a screen reader. There's some handy libraries and plugins to use. I'll name a few of them. There's Totally, which is a library from Khan Academy. You actually run it in your application, maybe on your dev server, and you can use that to check various accessibility issues. You can use browser plugins, such as Wave and Axe. Axe you can additionally use in end-to-end tests, which is great for your testers. There's another good one for doing exploratory browser tests, Funkify. It's a disability simulator, also a browser extension. And then there's some easy wins. If you run React Axe in your application, you'll actually see accessibility errors in your console, and that's great while you're developing. You know, every time the dev server reloads, you'll get a list of the accessibility errors. And another easy win is using the ESLint plugin JS6 A11Y. There you'll actually see accessibilities in your IDE. Finally, read the accessibility docs on reactjs.org. They're really good docs. They cover a lot of content, and they link to a lot of other content. And finally, I think it's just important to think about it a lot. Basically, it doesn't matter what tool you're using, you're not going to get everything. Even these browser plugins, they're not going to be able to take into account all the accessibility issues. You need to try everything out for yourself. If you have any other questions about accessibility in React, feel free to talk to me later. Thanks very much.